Cisco Security Integrated Architecture. In this video, we're going to focus on Cisco Threat Response, right? We'll do a walkthrough. Now, the first video was really focused on the architecture, right? How it all comes together, quick overview of the products within the portfolio, talked about systemic response, talked about AMP Unity, talked about retrospection, right? And then it also talked about Cisco Threat Response, the case books, and some of the value all of that brings, right? In this video, what we're going to do is focus on Cisco Threat Response. So the folks at Cisco did a really good job building out labs to realize the value of this solution set. And remember, CTR, Cisco Threat Response, is not a paid product. It's actually a product that you end up getting for free when you have other Cisco security products within the portfolio. And all you do is add modules. Obviously, the more modules you add, the better visibility in one pane of glass that you get, right? Very quickly. So when they built out these Cisco Threat Response labs, they've also built out some collateral, right? And the collateral is what we're going to go through two scenarios here, and we're going to walk through them together. When we go through this, I want you to think about your own environment and how you might do this today. So thinking about when a threat takes place, right? Think about the two things that you need to answer. And quite honestly, you want to answer these fairly quickly with confidence, right? And that is whether or not you've been compromised, what happened, right? And whether or not you have protection mechanisms in place defending against the threat, right? Those are two key elements that you certainly want to answer, and you want to do that with confidence. So whether you're going into 1 tool, 5 tools, 10 tools to figure this all out, just think about that a little bit as we go along. All right, so let's get started. So first thing, Poison Ivy is the one we're going to look at. We have an HR individual that says, hey, wait a minute, I am trying to hire security engineers because you can't get enough of them, right? And we know that's a hot market. I open up this resume and this command prompt thingy happened. Now, fair play to this individual, right? Because they created a ticket, they captured the screenshot, and they provided it to the help desk and said, this is odd, you might want to look at it. And remember, it's not about all the threats you block. We all are trying to achieve 100% accuracy when it comes to defending. The reality is you're not going to be able to defend against everything. So things will get in. And this is really where you're going to shine, right? This is where it really matters. So now we've got this resume.exe. So what do? Where do you start? Think about that for a second, right? What tools do you go to when you see something like this? So with Cisco, let's assume you've got the modules added. The more modules, as I mentioned, the better, right? But you don't need them all. You can add 1 or 2 as you start acquiring and start building out this architecture, right? This could be a 3-year journey. But you get that file name, you plop it into Cisco Threat Response, you hit the investigate button, and bam, right? Right away, I see I have one target. I see some observables. That observable would be the resume.exe, right? And here I can see the file path, right here. I see the SHA-256. I see the file name. I see the target. This would, if correct, right, would be the user that opened the ticket. And we can drill in to ensure that that is that user. The other thing to mention here, though, that the one user that did open the ticket may not have been the only user that got hit, right? There could have been another 20 folks within HR or other teams, right? That maybe the hiring manager that clicked that resume and happened, but they never opened a ticket, right? They just closed the command prompt thingy and moved on. You would see those additional targets here, right? Very quickly, and one threat on a single target may now be a single threat on 5 targets, right? But now you'd know that just by plopping in the resume.exe and hitting investigate. So from here, what we're going to do is browse in the threat grid. Now remember, threat grid's an outside looking in sandbox. And so a file gets submitted, whether through product or manually, if you have the portal. This is showing you portal access here. And also globally, all the files that are up there are available for viewing, right? Unless they're marked private. And so very quickly, there's that SHA-256. We see a malicious disposition. And again, here's that integration. It's showing you an internal target. As I scroll down, I can see all the related samples. And you can see there's different names here, right? Because the names can change, but the SHA-256 stays the same. So resume.exe is what we want to look at. So we pivot into that file. We see it's 100, right? Meaning it's bad. We see again that internal target. We can see it's Windows 7 is the operating system of the sandboxed environment. We can see playbooks that are assigned to it. Over here, we can look at reports. We can look at the process trees. We can actually watch the video as well. Down here, we can see there's poison ivy, right? So now we know the name. We can see its category is malware. We can see any of the MITRE stuff here. You can see tags, right? Remote access Trojan, and then your score. And remember, these are things that these are attributes or elements that you can pull out of this analysis and use them in your report, whatever you want to call your report. But you can now confidently start capturing some of this data and filling in your report. Now we're going to go to HTTP traffic here, and we're just going to see what it's actually communicating with, if it is, right? In this case, we see this ret.space. That's interesting. And if we scroll down a little bit more, we can see ret.space here based on DNS traffic, and Umbrella sees it as malicious. So what do you think we want to do here? Right. We want to actually add ret. Oh, sorry, I went too fast. We want to add ret space here and see what relationships. Now we might find another couple more targets that might not have seen the file but are reaching out to ret.space for whatever reason. We don't know the whole story here. I'm just telling you that there might be other assets out there that maybe had different things going to ret.space. It might not just be this resume.exe. There might be more to that story, like I said. In this case, this is what we would expect, right? Because it's a single host that's targeted. We can see the relationships with resume.exe and ret.space. So we definitely know that the file was executed and it reached out to that domain. We're going to look at resume.exe. And we're going to go in. We see the confidence level high. We see AMP for endpoint. We see that we can jump into the AMP for the AMP event itself. And that's what we're going to do. We want to know, how did resume.exe end up on that asset? And so the first thing we do is we pivot into device trajectory. That shows us all the relationships on the device itself in regards to, this process was invoked. It reached out to this connection. It pulled down this file. It's got this command line argument associated to it, whatever, right? All the endpoint detection response capabilities are here, right? And so what we see here is the event types, the event disposition and file types. There's that resume.exe. It automatically filled that in. And what we have here is PowerShell. Looks like it's the one that created resume.exe. And we can see here, oh, that's great. The file was quarantined. But it was a retrospective event. So the file was actually realized, right? Meaning that the file wasn't blocked right out of the gate. It was blocked later on, right? So things may have happened. So let's look at this a little bit more. So what do we want to know? We want to know who or what invoked PowerShell. So all we do is add PowerShell down here. And what we can see very quickly, and again, look at these little arrows, we can see that Winward launched PowerShell, which then did something with this resume.exe. And right here, we see this big yellow bar and this little explanation question mark. This is a cloud-based IOC, and what it's telling us is Microsoft Word launched PowerShell. Okay, well, we can see that visually here. Indicative of multiple dropper variants that make use of Visual Basic application macros to perform nefarious activities. Okay, makes sense, right? So what is it? Oh, so PowerShell. So Winward launched PowerShell and create a web client to download file from ret.space. This is all looking familiar now. Resume.exe and start the process. Okay. And here's another indicator here. PowerShell downloaded executable IOC. That's that resume.exe. Okay, so that's kind of cool. I didn't know that, right? So what do you think you want to know now, right? So now you know Windward somehow launched PowerShell, which went to ret.space based on a macro that was in that Word document, and pulled down resume.exe and executed the payload or started that process, right? All automagically, right? So what do you think you want to know? Well, the next thing would be is how did Windward get launched, right? So type in Windward. And what we can see is explorer.exe. Okay, and this little icon here means a command line argument was passed, right? So let's look at this a little bit more. Windward.exe, okay, was executed by explorer.exe. All right. Okay, there's some other stuff here. Let's scroll down. Command line argument. Microsoft Office, Windward.exe, C users John Doe desktop resume.docm/o space u. All right. Okay, so that makes sense. So the file was called resume.docm. The user clicked it, which opened Windward, then executed the macro that launched PowerShell, that went to ret.space, that downloaded resume.exe, and started the process. Wow, right? I think you've got a lot of insight into what took place. And honestly, your customers, whether it's internal, external, whatever, right? When you're in IT or security, you've got multiple customers, right? I like to call them, or business partners, if that's what you want to say. But ultimately, I think you can go with high levels of confidence in what took place here, and build some trust, right? This is good data. So do you think that's it? At this point, do you think we're good? And the short answer is no, right? Because I still want to know how resume.docm got there, right? That'd be interesting piece of information, because if it was through a USB, right, versus like it's on the desktop, or did they go pull it from a website, or did it come from Outlook or mail, right? I need to know that stuff. So let's put in resume.docm and see what we can find here. Let's type that in. And sure enough, Outlook. Now, is that all? Is that the end? So the user got an email with this docm file. They opened the file, which opens Windward, that launched the macro, that went to PowerShell, downloaded a file from ret.space called resume.exe, and started that process. Well, if you don't have email security, you're not going to know the last piece of the puzzle, right? You're not going to know which mailbox did it come into, what subject line was associated to it. But still, in this case, this is the end of this one. This case, it's still pretty good, right? Because we know that Outlook was the culprit. So we know it came in through email. It opened resume.docm, included macros. We know that Windward then was called to open the resume, right? Then PowerShell went out to ret.space, downloaded resume.exe, and started the process. And then we had a retrospective event, right? Okay, cool. So let's look at this as if we had email. Now, it's not the exact same attack, but this is fish the fish. And let me line this up. What happened is that we had a domain blocked in Umbrella. So Umbrella told us a domain was blocked, and the domain itself was called examplemalwaredomain.com/fishme.html. I know, very obvious, right? But that's the domain, and we saw it blocked. And some people might say, well, I saw it blocked, so why would I do anything? I mean, it blocked it, right? There's nothing to do. Well, it made the call. It made a call, so that means there's an endpoint or a device somewhere that had made that request. So that would suggest that there might be something on that asset that we might want to look into more, right? And ensure that we are protecting the environment the way we need to protect it. Remember, the goal of this is to feed this information back into your defensive capabilities. Not only understanding of what took place, but making sure that you're increasing your defensive capabilities overall. So we do that, and the first thing we do is we see 2 targets, and the 2 targets is umbrella. That's where we saw the block, and then we see this email address. So now we've got an idea of who, right? We know that bobc@acmematerial.com had seen an email that references this URL, right? We can see it's malicious and suspicious, right? The domain and the URL itself. That's reported by Umbrella, and this is really what we're going to focus on here is the email piece. And remember, the last video we stopped at, or sorry, the last one that we walked through with resume.exe, we stopped at Outlook. This would finish this off, right? Because then we would have seen who received the email, right? And then we can start maybe adding additional defensive capabilities, maybe strip out the file from other mailboxes that may not have opened it yet, etc. Right? But what we're going to do here is we're going to continue to work through this. So we see Bob Acme, that's the target account. We see who the sender email is, the sending domain. I can use that information in my defensive technologies, right? Maybe this is somebody that I don't want to be able to send us mail. We see the email subject. We see sending IPs. We see the message IDs within the email security appliance. So now what I want to do, and we're not going to show you a pivot from here. What we're going to do is we're just going to log into the email security appliance, and we're going to search for that subject, document you requested, right? So we log in real quick, go to tracking, we set up our timeline, we put in document you requested, we hit that search button, and bam. Now, first thing I notice right away, it's quarantined by content filters. But wait a minute. If it's quarantined, right, the subject line's right, and it's Bob Acme. That's the sender. That's what we saw in CTR, Cisco Threat Response. If it's been blocked or quarantined, how did the file end up on the host? Now, we have to assume there's a file because they executed, or sorry, a connection was made to that malware domain fishme.html, right? Maybe it was a link embedded in the email itself, but regardless, I mean, it says it's quarantined. So what we could do is look at more details here. Let's get a better insight into what might be happening. And so, okay, we see this. Oh, look at this. There's an attachment. So there's a PDF attachment that was associated to that email. Let's scroll down a little bit further, and we can see right here, look, there's that domain. Okay, we're on the right track. Oh, that's a bad reputation, -6.3. So that'd certainly be blocked in web security appliance, the built-in email security web function to block links, as well as Umbrella, right? So multiple layers here to be able to mitigate that risk depending on what technologies you own. But in our case, we know Umbrella blocked it. And URL reputation rule, and you can see this attachment. So there's an attachment associated to that URL. Well, that's starting to make a whole lot of sense. Now look at this custom log entry here with recipients. So there's that Bob Acme. So that, yeah, we know he received the email. This is what we discovered in Cisco Threat Response. Oh, look at this, bobciscoman@gmail.com. That is definitely interesting. So maybe this is a targeted type attack. Maybe this individual did enough research to know that they had a personal email and a corporate email, and they sent it to both. And, oh, you know, maybe what happened was Bob never saw the email in his corporate email and then went to Gmail, and sure enough, it was there. And what he might have done is open that file. We don't know that yet, but it sounds like that, right? So let's look at that SHA-256 of that web_2_0_draft.pdf. And let's plop that into Cisco Threat Response. Let's see what happens now. So when we do that, what we end up finding is, look at, these are my email servers. There's that SHA-256. There's that message ID. There's Bob. Okay, great. So what happened here? Well, and the email security appliance knew about it, so it blocked it. So that did its magical stuff. It knew it based on that URL itself, okay? In Gmail, they had went into their own Gmail account. It didn't get blocked in a firewall. It didn't get blocked. It landed on the endpoint and made that connection outbound. But now that we know that the SHA-256 is here, of that web, _2_0_ whatever .pdf, we can now take that. We can add a SHA-256 to a custom detection list. And remember, I said this earlier in the first video, is when you do that, now what happens is that if email and firepower for next-gen firewall or your web proxy is an endpoint within endpoint AMP, they'll now block this file whenever they see it. And I know what you're screaming right now, saying, well, wait a minute, it was already blocked in email, so why do you have to add it to a custom list? Well, it was blocked based on the URL, I guess, right, in email, which is fine, but then Umbrella blocked it outbound. So the corporate side saw it and blocked it. Gmail didn't see it, obviously, and it was executed on the endpoint because it made that connection to that domain, which was blocked in Umbrella. And then what we're doing here now, though, is going to the endpoint AMP to say, look, if you see this file and it comes through any mechanism, not just corporate mail or Gmail or Office 365 or whatever web-based mails out there, right? Whether it came through firepower, whether it came through a proxy connection, or you plug in a USB with it now, I don't care. If you see it on the endpoint, block it, right? If you see it anywhere else, further, as far away from the asset as possible, like I said, the next-gen firewall, right? Block it there. And that's it. So what happened was we got this example malware.com. We saw that in Umbrella. We saw a connection made to it. So we started our investigation. We determined that Bob C at acmematerial.com received an email that did associate itself to that domain. But we did see that it was quarantined. But there was this web _2_0_draft.pdf. We did copy that SHA-256, threw it in Cisco Threat Response. We show a host that was infected that did not have maybe endpoint AMP on it, right? That could have been the end result. Now, what we would do, if that's true, is we would get endpoint AMP installed on that asset and obviously add that file to that, that custom detection list. We also know that this file came in through, and maybe this arrow should be the other way, but through that Gmail account. So we had defensive capabilities that were working, but we didn't have enough of them maybe, right? In this case, the corporate mail was doing its thing. Umbrella was doing its thing. We prevented maybe the attack to being fully realized, but the host still got infected because it didn't have endpoint AMP, or maybe it didn't know about that file at the time. So let's walk through a couple of these, right? Answer questions faster about observables, right? Whether you get them from a domain, whether you get them from your own research, your buddy down the street. Very quickly, you can put this into Cisco Threat Response and get an answer. You can block and unblock domains and files very, very quickly using the interface and not having to log into 5 or 6 different products. You can hunt for those observables associated with known actor and immediately see your organizational's impact, right? I love this because I want to know what it means to me, right? Yeah, it's bad. Everybody's talking about it. But if I have defensive capabilities and I haven't been popped, then that's what I want to know, right? You can also save a snapshot of the investigation and save it for later or for others to view or for training, right? You can document the analysis in a casebook. We talked about that in the last video. And Then if you had a firepower guru or an email security guru, right? They can log into those platforms. They can then open that casebook and they can feed in their own observations that they've seen that might be associated to the attack. And then you could use that in your investigation on Cisco Threat Response. You can also use an API within the browser. Again, I talked about that in the last video too, where I can very quickly now go into a Splunk log and say, grab all the interesting observables from that log. Or I can be on a competitor firewall log and very quickly right click and grab that data. It'll go into Cisco Threat Response. Then it'll show me what it looks like from a Cisco security perspective. And you can integrate this easily into existing processes, right? So what I'd encourage you to do is look at how you do incident response today, see whether or not or how best to inject something like Cisco Threat Response into that process. When it comes to email, lots of cool stuff. Which email addresses or email messages have seen the file name? We want to know who was targeted. We want to know who the sender was. We want to know what file hashes to what messages. What is the subject line? We want to know who the sender IP or sender domain is. And again, remember, we can use this information that we're learning to enhance our defensive capabilities, right? The message IDs, and then what other details that might be surrounding the message ID header itself. So again, it's all about truly understanding what took place, right?